Hey, Brandon.
Morning, Nisha. Hope it's not too early for you over there.
It is dark outside. Yeah.
It's the problem with these East Coast events for the West Coasters. Gives me
I
one more
think we're
reason.
I think we're used to it now. Or maybe, I don't know. Perhaps not. Should I have my video on? I feel like
if you're up at 7 in the morning, I think that's permission to not have a video on.
I hope that's the case because I'm really not video ready.
That is more than understandable. Hi there, Phil.
Hi, Phil. Okay.
Doing separate joins. Same like last time they let the Polycom. That worked pretty good last time.
I made some changes. Not very much. Just cleaned it up a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. I just figured I would throw it out there as a starting point for discussions, and anything you wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, I think this is good to start. I have other concerns about this, but this is good enough because I think a good amount of time will be taken up by Mike.
Yeah, my thought is partway through when we talk about some of Mike's points is that will probably spill over into your discussion.
Yeah.
Especially when you get down to the bottom of his where he's talking about artifact providers and what they should do.
Yeah.
How's it going there, Josh?
Not too bad. How are you?
Is it all y'all?
Going all right.
Hey, Brandon. Can you hear
Hello,
us?
hello. We can hear you.
Hey. Good. Thank you, Jay. Welcome to KubeCon. So there's not a camera in the room, so various people that have webcams attached to their faces will join. Other there, Jesse's.
I was going to turn mine on, but
oh, look at that. Oh, you just blinded all.
sorry. I'm helpful. Is that good? I mean, goodish.
Yeah.
It's always hard being remote, being on camera, and then everybody else isn't. So probably said it. How about you not be smarter than me?
We're going to use the projection?
Yeah.
We literally are now.
Yeah, we're using it as something like that. I should probably put the power in that.
That's why everyone else is being quiet.
I feel like I'm required to turn on my video now.
No, you're good.
You are not.
You don't have to.
No one is ever required to.
It's peer pressure.
No.
It's anti-peer pressure.
You've not been on an IBM call. The IBMers all get panicky when they see a bunch of us with webcams on. They're like, what are those people doing?
Hey, wait, I'm an IBM.
It is funny when you find it in regional pockets, because even since my team's been on with Azure, A lot of the company doesn't use webcams pretty often, and so like they'll schedule a call with us, and like 5 or 6 of us are just like sitting there with our cameras on, and you'll see people like turn on their camera because it's like the other people that join the call don't usually have the cameras on, and like, oh, we got the cameras.
You know, my experience at AWS is developer teams don't like cameras, and all the leadership calls, everyone has cameras in it.
It's pretty much
It
right.
seems to be the split.
Well, on one of my machines just got the dog food branch of all the internal crap, and now I have avatars that I can play with.
Oh.
That's a good way to distract the meeting, is to have like your virtual self like sitting there doing things. I've found that it is completely not useful because nobody can focus on what you're actually saying. They're just like, there's this legless thing talking to me.
Okay, on that note, Mike, you're the first one on the agenda. Do you want to?
Mike, I hope it's all right. I went through that last night and started adding a couple extra bullet points in there as well.
I mean, if you want to go first too, that's fine.
No, I was updating Mike's presentation points with various links to other projects and GitHub issues and
Okay,
whatnot.
better.
Good job, Brendan. Thanks. I noticed. Hey, we'll get it started off. I think the big news is OCI is still around, right? It's good. The specifications were all merged into pretty much every container-based application on the planet once we ship the 1.0s, and now it's time to do 1.1s. Okay. And the first big feature that we'd like to get into 1.1, of course, is the references, support that the work group successfully brought to the image distribution specs. It's good. It was good work. Like, thank everybody. Big shout out. Class. When they did it, it was the first work group that we've really, had in OCI in an official context, and it worked out really well because it produced what it said for, and nothing more, pretty much. Everybody liked it, at least so far. But now we've got to prove it out because it's a release candidate only, and we move it from release candidate to GA. And that's going to require, in a nutshell, everybody that works with containers to actually pull it in, vendor it, rebuild, find out what changes they need to make, and engage with some of these new patterns that it enables. Okay, for example, artifact support, right? Refers, links being added to the image spec to these new artifact manifests. They're going to be pointing to existing container images, okay, or new container images that are pushed along with these new artifacts. Okay, I think there's sort of two patterns there. Most people are looking at artifacts as an add-on to a container, and a lot of people, look at containers as the way you create a new container with these kinds of artifacts. So it's sort of two patterns. And I believe most of the work group was focused on the latter pattern, where you would add an SBOM to an existing image, as a rough example. Okay, we're not done with conformance. We're not done with docs on these new extensions, so that needs to be worked on. Josh, are you here?
Yeah.
Josh,
I'm here.
you did a great job on the. Hey, you did a great job on conformance last time. I think. Is there any chance you could work on that again, or could maybe help somebody or some group of people on some issues to upgrade the conformance?
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely take lead on that. If there's any volunteers to help with that, I can help navigate. But realistically, we're adding one new endpoint, so I'm not sure how much effort it will be.
It would be
The
some minor
fallback
changes to make sure if there's a refers that, and they're supporting the refers API, that you would be able to pull down those referring artifacts or make or manifests, right?
Yeah.
We would need to make sure that the new revision of the image tag manifest, what do you call it? You know, the V11 is going to be there. If we decide to go into versioning and actually do a V11, I think we need to have that decision if we're going to do 1.1 to suggest that because it's 1.1 that manifest now can have a subject refers in it. I don't know, Brandon, did you guys make a decision on that?
So the
can't
image
remember.
manifest and the artifact manifest can both have a subject. I don't think they were prevented from having that field in the past, but now we've defined what that is.
Okay, so if the new tag is 1.1, then I would expect a conformance test, for example, to check that if you're adding a subject reference, that it would store and retrieve, and that you could run refers, and it would provide that result, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for the conformance is to check the artifact listing API, the refers API.
Right.
We kind of had
Registry.
consensus, but
And as far as docs go, I don't know, what do you guys think? How much docs do we need? Do we need examples? There was the question of, do we want to keep the artifacts, distribution alive? Or do we want to just push these documents into the existing image specs and distribution specs? The artifact spec being, of course, the place where we were originally going to store documentation to assist new developers of new types of artifacts.
Yeah, I mean, for everything that's in the existing specs, we've never really had like a separate, documentation stream, but we do have a blog, and I feel like we never even finished the one that was drafted by.
No.
I think we have opportunities to like sort of share.
Yeah, I think the last is the one you're talking about, right? For the new artifact.
Yeah, like for the working group completion of that work. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is the specs are essentially documentation, but I think it's worthwhile to consider whether we should be like introducing it in some posts, and then whether the artifact repo becomes more of what it originally was meant to do, is like, hey, here's different types, here's how you interact with them.
So I interpreted at least part of my question as, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So I interpreted at least part of Mike's question as, should we keep the OCI artifacts repo separate, or should we sort of identify the use now that artifacts is an actual thing inside of image spec? Should we identify the useful parts of the artifacts repo and move them into image spec? I think we should, just so that we have one fewer repo out there, like sort of giving people an idea. We should just put the useful parts of that, the guidance parts of like, this is what it means, not specification language, but like a helpful tutorial on adding a new artifact type, or that thing like that. I'm hearing thumbs ups, and I'm not seeing any table flipping in the room. So otherwise, does that sound okay to folks? As not as an actionable thing, but like, are people okay with that general idea?
Well, I know I am. I'm one of the maintainers of the artifact repo. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense now that it is supported in the image. That also means that the image spec team will need to be a little more active insofar as they'll need to help out some of these new manifest types, artifact types, as they come in, right?
Totally. So yeah, definitely taking ownership of artifacts off of your plate will definitely be nice for you and for all of those maintainers. And also, we may co-opt you as helpful image spec helpers to do that work over in image spec. But Yeah, that sounds good. Does anybody have misgivings or reasons not to do it?
I mean, the only thing I would mention is that there's going to be other projects at the Kubernetes level, at the CNCF level, at the OSS F level that are putting together new artifact types. And so we won't own all those artifact types. I don't think will be one of the standards that are basically doing the underlying part of it, right?
Right, so there will be a little bit of, I don't think there's misgivings, at least from all of us here. I'm sure there's other people that would be a part of that decision that aren't here that I see. As far as, if you're asking Jason particularly about co-opting the artifacts repo for this?
Well, I think he's saying you could get rid of it and move kind of
Yeah,
the key
yeah.
for
The concept is the image spec. Yeah.
Identify the
one thing.
helpful guidance in the artifacts repo.
One less thing to go stale is great.
Yeah.
I think it's always worth a separate line item of the number of repos that we have that are somewhat stale or could be refactored.
And I think it,
stale part.
and I think it reduces some confusion that people are still like, is there an artifact spec? Like, is there something else? And so if there's not a repo, then it reduces some of
There's no
that.
spec, then there doesn't need to be a repo. I think as long as the references, as long as the useful parts get ported into the appropriate places in image, or maybe even distribution, and then they're framed in such a way to say, no, this is what an artifact is. Yeah. We're not defining all the artifacts, right? To Mike's point, like there will be other artifacts coming. So its job is to say, this is what an artifact is.
The only
That's fine.
literal drawback that I see to this, which is not really a drawback, I mean, it would almost be like a historical indicator, is that the call to action of like, whether you're an implementer of those things or just notice that like a new project is pushing some, the kind of MIME type that we could like, the original aspiration there that I was always so excited about was just having a table of like, if you encounter this MIME type, here's a link to the docs, like where to find more and play with that thing. Because like you just said, Solo.io, like Bumblebee now is like pushing eBPF like core objects to registries, and it's like, are they contributing that MIME type back to us? No, it's not really their responsibility to, but they're interacting, they both interacting with OCI registries. How do you push that back in such a way? So like the maintaining of that thing, and if we like version something, a table like that really doesn't need to be versioned. So it just kind of be like a historical indicator that particular kind of table in the repo. It's always just like whatever's there is like the latest, and it might not relate to any kind of tagging or versioning at all. That part was it was a lot, like part of that discussion in the past, like to have that separate because it's not really a version thing. But if that's not really a concern, and I don't think it should be, then I think it's better together, like in one of the repos, like where you encounter MIME types.
Is that better? Is that sort of documentation better to have on the website than have in a repo that is versioned?
I think it should be on the website too.
It's both. You should feed from the image and artifact spec, right? Repo.
Sorry, I think I cut the line off. Brandon has his hand up. I'm sorry.
Image now really image and artifact.
Yeah. Okay.
I was sort of a little segue. Yeah, image and artifacts and distribution. Although I would say at the distribution spec level, you don't really need to have a list of all the artifacts.
Yeah, I was just going to point out on this one that we've already got in image spec today a list of projects that implement image spec. So adding in a list of here are the MIME types that use with other projects doing things with image spec is not too far out of what we're doing.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful, actually. Yeah. So there's like precedent for having this in image spec. Even though it's versioned and that versioning doesn't really mean anything for that table, it at least already makes sense. Okay.
Right. On the same line of thought, right, over in the distribution spec, that's probably the best place to put the implementers of the distribution APIs for clients and for registries and artifact registries.
Is that what we want distribution spec to be? Is just a list of not be, but have a list of every implementation of this API? I mean, it'd be useful, but I feel like it'd also get out of date and be, necessarily incomplete.
I think
Well, I think
distribution has the precedent that they've already got a separate conformance repo, and we can say conformance for 1.1 includes these specific implementations.
Yeah.
That gives a bit of a bar for entry as well. That has been.
Yep.
I couldn't hear that. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said, and yeah, so I was agreeing with Brandon, and then also saying that gives a required bar, sort of, so that you don't just have everybody saying, oh, I implemented a registry, look at that. So yeah,
Yeah.
the conformance is
Their status on conformance. Yes.
Yeah.
And it could also become a way that, we can point to or at least suggest how to implement, certain parts of it where the specification is a little weak.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm hearing is there is a general appetite for this, and I will start to make some PRs to add to the image spec repo stuff that we think is useful in artifacts. This is not going to happen immediately, and there will be PRs to discuss specifics, but I can start moving that stuff soon. Thanks. This was really helpful. I've already gotten everything I wanted to get out of this, and it's only.
Well, thanks for joining.
20 minutes in.
See you later, everyone.
I think it's also important to point out that some of these new artifact types are going to be systemic. They're going to be things that modify images. They're going to be things that are more, attached to the images insofar as an overall process is concerned, for our specifications in OCI. So yeah, as some artifact types, I think you're going to have to live in the image spec. For example, you're going to hear me mention Sajay's, idea for doing, patches, for example, on container images. I think that's a perfect one for a new artifact type that should live in the image spec, perhaps.
Yeah, let's discuss that as a separate, sort of focused topic on that.
Yeah,
But I hear you. I think that kind of thing could make sense inside of image spec. Like, I get that. I agree.
Okay. Anybody have anything else they'd like to talk about on that spec project update, conformance, and docs? If not, maybe move on to the registries. Of course, we talked at the beginning that we're going to need to, get registries to move up to the specs. Just pointing out here that distribution is a repository that many registries use as their base, and it's CNCF supported. And it would be nice if we had, somebody volunteering to do.
I mean, like, what's the maintenance status of that project?
They had a release.
So,
It seems that they were getting tight with the OCR project, and that needs to be discussed later, but.
OCR?
ORAD, sorry.
ORAD?
ORAD.
Oh.
I think they were working with them. I know a lot of the maintainers were changed significantly on distribution about a year ago to attempt to do that, and we probably need to work with them to see if they're ready to do that, spin of effort on that particular repository. We have some Docker people here, so maybe they can volunteer some of their ideas about what should happen.
But, I mean, I don't know if this has been discussed already, but maybe this isn't the case for that project, but a lot of commercial registries, there's a bit of a chicken and egg, like,
right.
The specs are RC, a lot of people want to know, is that going GA or are there going to be changes?
You got it. That's what I wanted to mention.
Okay.
Like how do you
Start the ball rolling.
how do you start the ball rolling until at least one registry tries?
Yeah.
And then we get our conformance test running against it, and we're not really going to know how successful it's going to be. I know some people. Brandon, didn't you have something?
Had a patch distribution. with people.
There's the playground that we had. So
Yeah.
if you want to jump in on that?
Was that a fork from any
hello?
existing? Was that-
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. There is so Sajay and I are actually doing a demo on Thursday, using a fork, the OCI Playground fork of distribution, and it totally works. So, as far as I think polishing that off and submitting it to distribution is the move. But that's been mostly Sajay and his team, like Shiwei, like all the Oris folks.
Okay, can you add a link to that in here?
Yeah, I'm facing it.
Pushed up a usable image that you can run. I'll paste it all.
Yeah, I don't know which branch it is. I can only assume it's the branch F.
I think it's just the main branch. I'll double check.
Yeah, it says it's 20 ahead, 22 behind, so what's it say? Part 3 down there.
And I just added the notes, I mean, for clients, I know Whereas Go is supposed to release their target is this week, or like supporting the subject field first.
So they're gonna do the subject field first, and are they gonna also add the artifact manifest?
Yeah, I just, if you click on that link, so there's a 7th task tracking issue, but migrating to OCI spec descriptor support for OCI artifact manifests, station refers.
So it sounds like we're in good shape then on some registry examples and.
What's the plan for the 1.0 releases? I know Brendan created a branch to merge things from master into, or from main into that branch. My concern is a bit that even though this work is still in flux, or might still change if we start to maintain 2 actual release branches, that some projects will switch to the 1.1 release, miss out on things from 1.0 or vice versa. Would it be enough to call out as to these parts are still subject to change?
Do we have a maintainer from Image that wants to address that question?
Can you ask again?
What's going on with 1.0, the 1.0 branch? Will we continue to maintain it? With fixes being pulled back as well while we're doing this 1.1 branch for a new BD for the anyway.
Because I started to comment on Brendan's PR, but I ran out of steam to finish it.
I think that's a good way of putting it in general, running out of steam. I think our branching strategy was to never branch. Like, I maintain branches. I mean, I like branching as in tagging the releases, but because even we found ourselves in a little bit of that, and that was like realizing that I messed up how we did it even in the past. When, as we were releasing this 1.0, that we saw that there was changes between the 1.0 whatever 3 and right before all these changes went in to tag a release of that. Are you suspecting that there will be more changes into a 1.0 needed? before something like the artifacts? Or the refers?
No,
Like relaxing
I'm
certain
somewhat
restrictions.
proposing to just continue releasing from main. And even if that means that there's some bits that are still subject to change, that
Because
the other
basically
parts.
what we're
that-
doing now is that we tag 1.1 on main.
Yeah,
So you're proposing that, but you're saying you want something from 1.0?
no, I wanted to see what they do with Brendan's work on merging that, or merging everything before 1.1 into the 1.0 branch. And I don't think we need to.
Or just tagging it? Didn't we, Sajay put a vote out for, oh no,
I think Sajay's just released Candace for the 1.1.
Yeah.
So-
It was to tidy up that one other thing that didn't make it in. I thought, didn't we tag? Okay, give me a second. I'll look.
We've got the PR sitting out there to think about doing the 103 tag based off the 1.0 branch, but I think there haven't been enough eyes to sit down and look at to give a proper answer to that question yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the desire comes from knowing just how long it's been since we did a release and wanting to get something out there at the same time. We know that the 1.1 stuff isn't really GA yet, and so we don't want to tag that.
We're taking notes on this additional question and result.
Want to block on this.
Okay, cool. We got a list there where we're trying to get a hold of, contact with for conformance test buckets and running. If you got a registry, just list it here. Moving on to the clients. Unless anybody has another question on the specs, branching, fixes, relaxing.
On the registries, the only other thing I was pointing out was I think there's a handful of projects out there based off Go Container Registry. And so I think they've got their own open issue on importing it over there. And the big question to me is going to be getting some of the big commercial cloud registries to update.
Yep, and maybe we need some help from them on the distribution updated. And somebody or some people to jump on that. So we got an open issue, but no.
I can speak for Go Container Registry. The issue is assigned to me and the PR is open from me, but I keep getting doing meetings instead of writing code. But after that, clients should start to handle references well, including cosign. Like the goal is to get cosign to, which uses Go Container Registry, to use references when available and spec conformant tags when not available. So yeah, if I wasn't in so many meetings, looks around suspiciously, I would I'd be working on this.
Thanks. Okay.
I can poke the people involved in Oracle registry, but I don't think that that's something that they particularly care about. they built that as a requirement, not necessarily something that they're putting a lot of money towards. So yeah, I'll find out. But my feeling is that don't expect anything from them.
Well, I think it's a lot of what Bill was talking about. We have a large chicken and egg problem here that everybody that's waiting for some of the registries to sign on, right? Which is why I started the conversation off with registry. It is popular, Docker Hub still, and I can tell you, IBM's ICR is also based on registry, and we have an intention to pick it up. And I think we're going to try to assign a resource to help on this on the first quarter.
I sort of think of it like increasingly larger dominoes. Like we don't want to just go straight to ECR and ask ECR to change. We have to get smaller registries to adopt it. In smaller registries, not in terms of like importance, but just like traffic and bureaucracy, right? Like distribution supporting it will be great because now anybody at any size can use it, can opt into it. And as smaller ones start to support it and say that there's no problems, we can maybe like cut the 1.0, say it's good enough for smaller registries, and then the bigger ones will adopt it. They'll be naturally slower anyway.
Yep, you can rebuild the the local registry and run it in private and for testing purposes. And
for what it's worth, just speaking about, I could just talk high level and hand wavy style about ECR. But we've been kind of lockstep implementing this behind the scenes as the spec has progressed. Okay. So we're not as, even though we don't have this is vendor to vendor too, right? Like you have all these open source projects, you have products, they behave differently. It is not a very AWS thing to have like a developer preview, right? So we basically won't release something until we know it's done. That doesn't mean we haven't been working on it. And so, I mean, we're happy to talk at length about that implementation and how we've been doing that. Not from a product commitment point of view, but from an OCI member point of view, and just talk about that because it is.
So we can link our conformance to a private build, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just to be clear, I picked ECR completely randomly out of a hat in that example. There's no shade or anything.
Good candidate, very good candidate. That's to be clear. Like, there we go. We actually are building stuff. So, yeah.
I mean, if my example was to highlight the slowness of large registry implementations, ECR is way ahead of the curve. If John was here, I'd give him shit for GCR, but maybe I wouldn't because he's not.
Not to put dates on anything, but I think it's important to recognize when these large registries are intending to bring them forward, they'll tell the client tools, oh shoot, I want to work with that registry, right? And oh wait, what's the conformance test? Oh, I don't like that. Let me fix it, right? And that'll modify the spec, and then we'll get the GA. I think that's what's going to need to happen here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the important thing that I'd want to know from the ECR work is not so much when you're ready to release it, but more if you've been testing this internally and been creating the implementation, are there any showstoppers that would have you say, no, don't release this spec as GA because that's not going to work for us? And maybe that's too soon to get an answer, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, nothing we've found so far.
No big stumbling blocks yet.
It'll
get interesting once people start actually implementing the new schemas and being able to support two versions of the API at the same time, and nudge, right? And also being able to support the refers API. And I think there's going to be some pretty significant differences when you start looking at the image index, which before was just for platforms, but now can be used in two scenarios. One as a refers API response, and then also you can add new artifacts to these image indexes, unless we're going to say that's not doable in the spec. Currently, it is doable that you can actually not just have platforms platform images in an image index, but you can also have artifacts that are pushed with that image index. Okay. Prior to the image index. All right. Brandon's probably grimacing at what I just said.
I'd just love to see this stuff get adopted.
Yep, good. I guess the reason I guess the only reason I brought that up is I think there may be some performance issues with this new specification insofar as we're adding artifacts to the existing image, and we're going to have possibly separate connections to retrieve these artifacts, right? And every time you make a connection, you start pulling image indexes and calling new APIs. There's authentication issues. Where do these images live? Do they have to be local? Can they be remote? Are we going to have to change the API to support remote artifacts because some of them are being stored in something like SigStore or something? Yeah,
So I don't think they'll be stored in SigStore itself. Do we want to jump into some of the client stuff though, if we're getting to that?
Yeah, let's go right to the client. Moving on to the clients. So clients are build. Yep, we need new build tools. Resolve, push, pull, cache, libraries, all the good stuff, right? After everybody vendors the new things in, the APIs need to change at these layers. Be nice to know what the status of any clients are. Anybody here working on a client they want to talk about?
I can chime in for one, and I'm sure Jason will chime in for his own. Reg client is up to date and working with this stuff as of already. And I think a lot of the work in Crane and SigStore is going to come along as the Go container registry gets updated, because that's both client and server.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you know on the SigStore side, were they going to actually, start supporting, local registry support, local to where the image is stored, push?
Cosign already supports pushing to a local registry. It doesn't care where you push image stuff. When Go Container Registry starts to support the references, both the references API and the specified tag fallback scheme, Cosign will migrate to adopt the real official tag scheme instead of its made up YOLO tag scheme.
Gotcha.
There will probably be a time where we'll have to have people like support both and like deprecate and warn and maybe upgrade them or something. That part is not fully fleshed out, but Cosign will, as it adopts the references API directly and the specified fallback tag scheme, it should be independent to, transparent to users that this is happening for them. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think possibly this is the kind of thing that, I'm sure SigStore team will want to have their own documentation on it, but we could probably use some additional documentation either in the image spec or the distribution spec that at least refers to the, where your status is for supporting the image spec.
Yeah, I mean things like Cosign's signature format or Cosign's signature media type is the kind of thing that we would want in a table of known media types. Like here is how signature works. But yeah, we can sort of handle that once the code works a little bit. We can document it both in image spec and Cosign and anywhere.
When we're getting into the clients, I saw a list of things in there like containerd, cryo, stuff like that. Is there any foreseeable need on the runtime side that we're going to need support for this? Because I feel like everything we've done has been attempting to be completely transparent to the runtime and not touching what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that too. I mean, I think there's no like immediate need to support these capabilities until such a time as runtimes are asked or people write plugins to do interesting things with artifacts. So the running of a container doesn't require any of these features to be added to runtimes today. But I'm not saying like there's no interesting work there. I'm just saying I think out of the gate, there's nothing that runtimes have to do.
Right, yeah, so far, none of the artifacts are the new specs that touch the runtime spec. Okay.
Yeah, but even like pulling an image, even if it had S-bombs and signatures, if my runtime doesn't offer that support, I don't need to even implement those features.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a customer says, can you
like
do that?
CTR would need a way to call refers.
Well, when someone decides to do something interesting with refers, that's all I'm saying. Is it's not in the hot path of running a container. There's nothing I need to do to go
Most
pull.
of the things could be implementations, like people will install their own fetchers or.
Yeah. I mean, I think there will be a time when there are interesting things to add to runtimes, but I think compared to like registries, it's like at a different time scale.
So mostly it's just going to be re-vendor and
Yeah.
Or pull-in plugins.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's going to say is on the client side, there will be certain tools that will leverage the specific functionality, like I mentioned the other day, a minute ago, Bumblebee. But it's doing its function, not using container G or anything like that, and really relying on the registry and everything.
there is some new media types.
I was going to say, probably super far down the line that runtime to care about this because some of the standalone tools.
Well,
yeah, it's only when one of those has ubiquity, like maybe there's something around S-bombs that gets ubiquity, that's finally when you would actually see it integrated into the runtime.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree.
far ways out.
The first example I think of is signing, and signing is typically implemented by something like an image controller that's going to know this separately by its own. So the runtime doesn't really care.
Yeah, I think that same question just came up in the room, but
Yeah,
signing is the one place where you could add it at the runtime layer, but today, at least in the Kubernetes world, that's handled by admission control that will have to handle refers API and full signatures, but Containerd today doesn't have support for actual signature verification in the runtime. I think there's interest to do that, but it's
Right.
no one's actively working on that. But.
MCG has a very support site verification.
Right. Yeah, client side. So like NerdCTL works cosign already.
There's also some Kubernetes build for verifying that out of the machine.
Yeah.
So what we were just talking about there is a recognition that our fat clients that sit on top of the container runtimes are going to be probably where most of these APIs are tried out and build tools are tried out. But then the container runtimes just need to be able to support the new media types when we do our pushes and pulls and not break anything. A rebuilt, re-rendered, and retested at the container runtime, and then bad clients need some additional tooling.
I haven't taken good notes on this.
Anybody here that can represent some build tooling? The new manifest types.
As everybody slowly turns to Sebastian.
Who's working on that tool?
Like a hero probably knows more, but no. I don't have a lot of info. I was trying to get some info already also from Dr. Hub's side and things, but I don't have it at hand. So no. A hero probably from the build kit side.
So maybe very cheap question. Chinese articles about which I think we need more protected.
There is one open issue I've seen over on BuildKit, which is them looking at how they're going to include SBOMs with the image. And so we point out that this is coming down the pipe. I don't know if they're ready for it yet. And I don't know if they've checked recently.
Another question would be, could BuildKit start using artifact manifests instead of image indexes for build caching?
Right.
It's currently just using OCI image and like this.
Yeah.
I think we can consider using.
I could have an issue open for that.
But probably after the Docker Hub support.
They've said soon from Docker Hub in terms of removing the filter on the configuration descriptor media type, but I haven't seen that come down the pipe just yet.
More chickens and eggs.
And they'll have dependencies on the run times as well to then re-render and yeah. That, actually, when the specs were running, we were probably updating the vendor every month or so. It wasn't that big a deal. But I think we're behind now, which is one of the reasons why Sebastian was asking, when are we going to do an update to 1.0? Right?
I added some notes and because the conversation moved on.
Yeah.
One for the image space, but for the runtime space, and so a lot of projects were operating and yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely that's a part of this discussion here, right? We need. It's up. We're going to do another rev of the OCI specification, and we've got good reason now for them to pay attention to that. Most of the changes, I believe, to the 1.0 specs have just been to either tighten restrictions or loosen some restrictions, and really shouldn't break anybody. They should have all been non-breaking changes, with the exception of some of the rules that somebody may not be paying attention to, or some APIs weren't being tested. Alex also brought up earlier, we are at the Kubernetes conference. Some of the higher level changes, need to happen, such that, for example, the status or state of a container that's running should be passed back to the Kubernetes stack, so they'll understand that image has been signed, for example. That's the kind of thing that we need to make sure that we're applying to the CRI API, and that's going to require Kubernetes, caps, and those take a long time to get through. So if you guys have any of these changes that you're making or thinking about today, new artifact types, I suggest start opening up the cap earlier rather than later. It can take a long time to get that visible to the Kubernetes space. No offense to them, but they're really busy. Signode, for example, is really busy, and they need help as well. I've got a cap I've been trying to get through for 2 years. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it's 3 months. No big deal, but you can take.
Do folks have an example of a thing that has to be done through Kubernetes and a KEP? I feel like when a process is hard, my instinct is to get around it, and there's plenty of extensibility in the Kubernetes ecosystem to get around stuff. Like, We're verifying that images are signed before running them today, right? And no one ever wrote a KEP. We were pretty
Right.
happy with that.
So, yeah, well, that's a great example, right? If you wanted to have a new, pod policy that to only run images that have been signed, okay, then you would need to create a KEP to request that become an API step change in pod,
Right.
such that we not only supports image pull policies, but now also image verification policies. Okay, would have to be introduced in Kubernetes.
Why would that?
And then-
Why would that need to be done in Kubernetes itself, right? Like this is the ecosystem is large and flexible.
Well, if you're in the Kubernetes space and you're writing pods, not containers, or if you believe your containers should be managed by Kubernetes pod policies and only scheduled to a particular worker node, you might want to say, I want worker node A to have things that aren't signed, and worker node B, C, and D to have, pods that have been signed. Those are labels, though.
These are definitely implementable today without modifying Kubernetes, right? It's a very flexible.
Yeah.
So
yes, you can use labels for annotations. You can use a modify.
The only time that like some of these kind of pieces, and this is where I haven't even fully gotten into some of the problems of differentiating and when it needs to get past this CRI. It's not really. There are times. I don't know if this is really part of this discussion, but so like here recently we've been talking in the confidential container space about even the community first went in the direction of just assuming that you're going to be pooling inside of a trusted compute boundary. So like once you spin up the encrypted memory, that you now have this different fetcher and snapshotter that are inside the container, not on the host's graph, whatever system. But there's use cases for both. So how at the Kubernetes level do you schedule something and say, actually this one pool using the host snapshotter and this other one pool using inside the trusted compute, like this one needs to be encrypted and this one doesn't need to be encrypted? Because some of those things, even like what you're saying of like the label selector workflow, you can just schedule it and the Kubernetes layer knows which node it's scheduled is on the container, the runtime underneath doesn't care, it's just told to run a container. But then you start getting into certain of those details that like, cool, now it's scheduled on the node that I know, like label selector, this node has the hardware that I'm needing, but I need like to tweak, and like how much of that can you pass through and that part, like, but it change the CRI and that kind of thing that's using it. It does happen. And I don't know, like you're saying, Jason, how best to just slam your head through it or make some core architecture decision of like, assume that we're always doing only this one thing. That there's going to be two.
I think my advice to summarize this.
Like it was an MJX with one scenario, it's easier.
Yeah, I'm just saying like,
exactly.
When you make the easy choice of like, assume it's always one, and then you've just created a shitstorm for yourself later. But
I feel like that's
Yeah.
a potential problem, though.
That's not an OCI problem. Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying. But like sometimes I think some of these questions have come up even in like even in like signing. So signing like are the credentials of who you trust that live like in a storage layer of a Kubernetes system, and like Red Hat always argued that should be at the host level, like trust layer, like landing stuff in Etsy on the host and but like there's like a trust thing there.
Key ring off for registries, for example. Where's that? How does that get handled?
I think
have runtime
I would encourage folks to not try to climb KEP Mountain if there is an escalator to where you want via its many extensibility options, right? Like it doesn't have in
That's
Kubernetes.
completely right. Right, like I don't think we pursue a KEP for something that doesn't need to be kept, right?
Thank you.
I think the answer is when something, you've got things for image signatures, for example, right? You could run cosigned, you could run Caverno, you could run Robinson Gatekeeper on it, like you can do all sorts of different things. When this becomes mainstream enough that people want it natively in a pod spec, that's where the KEP comes from. So I think the high level answer here is when to cut a KEP is when it makes sense for Kubernetes. right? Right now, it doesn't make sense. We're all proving out different things. We don't know what the right way is. Those changes, the things that we're doing now are going to change over the next 6 to 12 months anyway. So completely valid advice, like, let's not do that now. But knowing that at some point it might make sense for someone to do it is something just to keep a pin in.
Running off that, a good idea now might be to like figure out which indicators are the ones where we identify it is time to make the cap, right? Because even if we made a cap right now, they'd probably point us and say, implement it first, like make an emission control error, try it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, so like what are the things that we would see that would indicate it's time to do that?
I'm bringing that full circle. I think that's a lot of what you see when there's a 2-year cap or a 3-month cap. Yeah. Like when you write a cap and feel like, yes, thank you, and it just gets banged into the next release, versus, wow, that's really forward thinking and scares me. Maybe we're gonna think about it for a couple of years first. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll make sense.
So the CRR untyped data field, that's all.
Should have been in the LF.
Oh my God.
More data.
Okay, time check? Got an hour.
Ooh.
Where do you want to go? I know it happened. No. The other.
Sometimes on that first.
Hey, user namespace is fun.
I know.
Now it's
So glad for
It's
you.
only been 14 years. I think the last thing I wanted to talk about is, some kind of a migration process from ORAS to, in Helm maybe, to the current new specifications. I just wanted to make sure that that's happening. I know the issues were out, and there was a lot of discussions. I just want, verification, validation is going to happen, so we don't have any bifurcation of the concepts of how we're going to do artifacts and reverbs.
Yeah, I think signing is driving a lot of that. Like, I think Jason already brought up, or maybe Brendan, that GCCR is moving in support of cosine, because cosine consumes GCCR.
Okay.
Notation is coming along. It uses the ORAS Go library, and so both of these want.
So
both of these
that's
signing
why
solutions wanting
Yeah.
to-
So they're going to do. So we're good.
Yeah.
We're going in one direction.
Yeah, everybody's moving. It's happening.
Yeah.
Yay. Yay, OCI. Okay. I think that's it for mine. And I believe Brandon and Nisha, you're going to be up next. Y'all want to take a quick break? Get some waters, whatever, and.
There.
Thank you.
I'll need to go. Me and Amy have rum all the time.
All right, guys.
Okay, we're gonna come back at after.
11:08.
Right after.
I know what's gonna happen, but like, get a cup of coffee.
Let's say 8 after, and that way when people see a specific minute.
Exactly.
Unless you're in India, then it's 38 after. Unless you're in Korea, then it's 52 after. 53 after.
Yeah, we're pushing on the pod thing, more of another proof. The super high level.
Where everyone forgets that.
Not the big red button. We muted it so they wouldn't hear us talking about it.
No, that's very nice. Thank you for muting all those.
Yeah.
That was very useful. We didn't have someone cross check.
Here.
Yes, phone folks. Brandon, I believe you were kicking off the next one.
Yeah, myself and Nisha. Nisha, are you there?
Come on in.
Yep, I'm here.
All right. Do you want to take it or should I kick it off and turn it over to you?
I can kick it off. Okay. Let me know when to go.
Now, there.
Okay. So next topic is about standardizing artifact media types and annotations for the purposes of interoperability among clients. The best use case to I guess demonstrate the problems that we're dealing with is SBOMs. So there are many different SBOM standards. There are also different types of SBOMs. And then there are things that link to SBOMs, such as VEX documents. You could sign an SBOM, and yeah. So there are SBOMs, there are supplemental artifacts that go with SBOMs, and there are multiple SBOMs that can link together. You can have different SBOM standards that link to other SBOMs that link to artifacts. So it's a big smorgasbord of SBOMs that clients will have to deal with. So if it's just one client that knows how to deal with this sort of stuff, then it's not a so if it's just one client that will basically say like, okay, I support all of these things, then it's not a problem. But if you have different tools that create different kinds of SBOMs, and they are all going to multiple consumers, then they have to be standardized. So I think SBOM is a good use case for this, but I can also think of other situations where this would come up. But because like everyone knows that, well, I don't know. I think there's enough literature out there and enough Twitter battles that I think folks know that there are different types and different standards and different tools. So there are, over here I have, well, there are 3 possible ways we can deal with it. And I think the way we want to do this, Brandon, is kind of start with one that, I'll start with one that I like. I like the single manifest and single blob one because it's like dead easy. But that ignores situations where one would create like multiple SBOMs on a file system, and they want to like link them all together. And rather than push them one by one or in parallel to the registry, they'd rather like bundle them all up in an artifact type and push them to a registry. So then there's the example of the single manifest with multiple blobs, and that supports that kind of situation. The problem there is that currently in the spec, the artifact type is we've said it. You have to follow this RFC number that I've forgotten, but how do we say that all of these things, all of these blobs are all like a particular type of artifact. So how do we say that they're all, for example, SPDX SBOMs? The more complicated or like the higher level situation is, how would we say that these are SBOMs? Or even more complicated, how do we say that there's an SBOM and a signature? And in that case, like there's like multiple artifact types that we I don't really know how we deal with that situation. So that's in general the problem that we're trying to address here. So go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, the list here, when I put together all the different scenarios, I didn't want to say any one of these is right. I just wanted to say that if I was writing an SBOM generator and pushed it up as an artifact, conceivably I could do any one of these. And none of these really have options here to say this is a compressed SBOM. So how would that be represented? It would be nice to be able to compress this stuff when we push it up to a registry. And if I was writing a tool that generated all the different kinds of SBOMs out there, nobody said, here's how you do it with the Cyclone, the SPDX and everything, all as one big artifact. Does that mean you have to push up multiple artifacts? That's fine if you do, but we just haven't defined that. And so we've got multiple ways that we could potentially do this. And that's okay if there's only one tool that's generating it. But once we start having multiple tools that start generating this code and multiple tools that's trying to consume it, it'll be really useful if we came out and said, yeah, there are different ways you could do this. This is the way we're telling you to do it from OCI, so that all the different tools that are potentially shipping this stuff push the same thing, read the same thing, and they can all interoperate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we avoided the problem with the signing because cosign just became like the de facto tool for it. But I can imagine something that maybe some other new signing thingy comes up and there's one tool that says, oh, if you want to sign it this way, then you use this, and then they have their own IANA media type, and then cosign says, oh yeah, we sign like that too. So how is cosign going to say like we have this type of signature? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is a hairy problem. I think some of this would be even just kind of, first off, I don't think that there's going to be a single choice or decision here that's just going to solve this problem. Because even if we thought we had agreement on that, it would be underlined by kind of a base assumption that you just even mentioned, like, sure, cosign could be considered the de facto, but the underlying assumption is that there will always be another one at some point, or multiple or whatever. Like, even if it's solved a certain point for a while, it might be that cosign itself even introduces a different style and media type in the future. So, like, in this kind of a thought for myself, the underlying assumption or value is like, assume that there will always be another or next implementation. So how best to facilitate these kind of clients that are trying to participate and, effectively solve this for themselves, that have been expecting each client to reinvent that wheel over and over for themselves. And knowing that you're not going to be able to go around to every tool that's generating an SBOM to coerce them to have agreement or otherwise, or use a certain one or otherwise. So, like, if it were me, I would probably, like, if there was a place to have the MIME type be something as potentially reusable as possible, like, SPDX, or, application/SPDX version blah, And then if you want it compressed, then you tack on the, plus star Z-stud or G-zip or whatever, like that use that kind of the RFC enumeration for the MIME type. So others could potentially put their SPDX in there, and clients would know, like, oh, I know how to deal with SPDX version blah, and G-zip compress or whatever. And then if there are differentiations, then like that's like a place to use something like annotations to say, but it's this flavor of something, like here's a hint that knows that I packed this with additional information or whatever. And maybe eventually there grows a need to say, actually, there's enough about this SPDX that it's this particular style of SPDX, and that conversation starts to involve that upstream community that maybe they need to enumerate multiple MIME types, and like say, this document is not just an SPDX. It, like you said, like it connects to others and it bridges or does a lot of things. So that's like one aspect of the conversation, knowing that that's kind of if it's always a moving target, how can we at least grab onto some generic aspect of it, and then different, like allow ourselves to give hints where something's reusable. Separately, I think honestly, having a single client is a good playground to tease this whole idea out, but it almost sounds like a place for just like libraries. Like if a lot of your clients are in Rust or Go, like start having a library that makes it easy for them to have those interfaces of saying, I'm pulling from a registry or I'm trying to deal with this MIME type, and like something where it allows people the implementers to not have to basically have so much of the same code carried everywhere, but like, I don't know what your use case is. Here's helpers. And then as you're working on like the tools that you're already having in mind, that you start finding shareable portions of libraries that could be iterated on and others could use, and basically ease the pain for those implementers as new media types come out, or additional tools or whatever. That would end up honestly being where most of the action would be, because you'd be improving it by the tool you're using, and then you'd be helping future users as well, future implementers. But I don't know that even if we could arrive at an idea of what any kind of standard anything now, that there's no governing power that we hold in this group to say that people should even use it.
I think
Go ahead.
I think the biggest
Michael?
power we have is we commit something into the image spec or artifact repo. Assume we can merge those into one image spec. If we commit something that says there are different implementations doing this, and this is what they have all decided to use as their commonality for shipping this specific media type. And we've got a little bit of that in the artifact repo today, where we say, here are the different config media types. And so bringing that over and saying, okay, here are the different artifact types, here are the different descriptor types for the blobs for a specific kind of artifact, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I want to be really sure that image spec and distribution spec are not prescriptive about how you must organize your media types, but descriptive of how media types in the wild exist, right? Like, it's not OCI's job to tell the SBOM community how to orchestrate their artifacts. It's SBOM goes and does it. SBOM folks go and do it, and then tell OCI how they did it. We can have advice. We can have like, here's things we've seen work in the past, but I really want to let folks go do what they think they should do, and not have OCI like tell them how to do it. I don't think we're going that way. I think we need to be really careful not to tell people.
That's a good differentiation, because I think that's where I was. You said it better than I did. Even if I could imagine, on the horizon, even if you had a tool that implemented something like this, and then it was even worded in such a way that like, here's one way we've seen it done, and it'd be great if people used it that way. That somebody will come along and make something that looks like an S-bomb, but has additional characteristics that's not quite an S-bomb. So then if we had like, say, a new field that said it's a type of thing that's an S-bomb, so other tools could try and guess what it is, then somebody would create a media type that's kind of an S-bomb, but it's kind of also, you know, a reproducible build. And you're like, no, that's not an S-bomb. And then you're like, you just created a problem for yourself.
I mean, I don't think it's up to us to define what the S-bomb should look like. Right?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, is there like?
I mean, if someone pushes an SCG to have a nice graphic, we don't dictate what the format.
I'm just saying, like, not being prescriptive of like, if you're implementing an S-bomb, you ought to do it a certain way.
Yeah, the risk I want to avoid is if you push an S-bomb up with, pick a tool, say SIFT, and that's the tool you use to push the S-bomb, that shouldn't be the only tool you can use to pull the S-bomb. So it would be nice if we had some interoperability between the different tools out there, and to do that, I think they need to know the common method everybody's using to push these.
Yeah,
how we document that.
But like how some of the people, like some of those projects we have that are needing some love and attention, like the runtime tools, image tools, that by and large, they are mostly used because they provided some kind of library that allow people to iterate. And that's what I was thinking of earlier, like cleaning house. Is because if you look at those projects, they look almost completely dead, but they're actually still used because a few folks were like, we're doing the same things with the runtime over and over, and so they put it all into the runtime tools. So now, like, several different projects use it, but for this one narrow use case. And that's almost like what we're describing here, of like, there's certain things with images, like fetching or, dealing with them or knowing how to interact with them. It'd be nice if that was, at least parts of that were consistent. And I think that's could happen here. It facilitates some like standard pieces like pushing and pulling it or interacting with certain media types. So that, again, it sounds like more of a library where that conversation would become useful.
Yeah, I think even higher than that, we're still trying to figure out what the workflow is that developers and DevOps folks would be using. And based on the workflow, this bundling could, like, this envelope creation could happen any number of ways. So we haven't really standardized on a workflow even.
I know one of
the
big points. The big point here coming out of OpenSSF is that it's not just good enough to generate some of the provenance, you actually have to verify it later on. And so to do that, then you know what they're verifying. So I guess action items for this, do we have a good idea between us that A, there is a problem, we agree there's an issue? And in terms of solving the issue, does it make sense just to start having commits over to image spec, or are there concerns with that?
I get the impression there's a wait and see consensus from this group about this.
And yes, from me, but that's not, I'll be perfectly clear that that's not because I don't want to see a solution out of it, but sometimes the action comes in like seeing a workflow that works. And it's like Jason said, the prescriptive side of that is like, not wait and see because I don't want to see it standardized, but because I'm not actively working in that space. And if I weighted it in any amount of like opinion or steered it in any direction, it would not be useful for what kind of creativity that effort would have.
Might be limiting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So I realize that this is something that y'all have your hands in a lot and you're clearly passionate about, but it's not like you're not getting a emphatic yes from my side,
And in
because-
terms of what to commit, what I'm thinking of is creating a space, not actually filling it out and saying this is what everybody should do, but saying this is where you as an implementer of something like this can come in and commit to this one file over here that says this is what you're doing.
And that would basically be what is in the artifacts repo today that we're talking about moving over to the image spec. It's just kind of guidance for these are how certain implementations have done this.
Yeah, I think that is the kind of thing I'm talking about moving over, is like general guidance from our wealth and years of experience doing this. That was a joke because we haven't done this much. That people can pick up and use for their own use case when they need to.
I agree with that. I think it'd be a little early to start saying this is how all signatures should be, or this is how all SBOMs should be, because we've only really started talking about that in the last few years.
Yeah, and if our advice is bad and not.
You've been working on this for years, but it's been kind of a title lift to finally get to that conversation where the implementations are having what they need now, and it's kind of a wild open frontier. So of possibility.
I think there will be many more projects for each of these use cases that should not be constrained by what happened to be first, I guess.
Yeah.
Cool. Last call before moving on to the next.
That was a lot to, I'm looking at the notes, so if anybody has a particular piece of notes. Add.
All right. So the next item on here was standardizing references. I think a lot of people know what a reference is implicitly. They've used them before. You just say Docker run Alpine, or you image : whatever in your Kubernetes manifest that you're creating. And that gets transformed over to knowing that's supposed to be over on Docker Hub /library/Alpine, appends the latest tag onto there. You can change that around. You can put it on a different registry. You can add digest for pinning, all that stuff. So that's what a reference is that I think most people know. That's not defined by OCI. That's defined over in distribution at last check, and they've kind of got some file over there you can go look in and know that that's how that was done in one place. Everybody's kind of adopted it. Sometimes they introduce bugs in different places, but that's how we define a reference so far. I think it would be useful if we were to define it in OCI. And the reason I'm thinking of that is when you start getting into things like OCI layouts, because defining here's where the image is on the file system, it's turned into a Wild West all over the place. Jason, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. If you have more you want to say, that wasn't a hand to stop you.
Yeah, so when I look at the Wild West, like Scopio, Anchor, my own Reg client, BuildKit, everybody's picked a slightly different way of saying the scheme : and maybe a couple of double slashes in there. When I look at the RFC, it tells me that I'm doing the double slashes wrong if I do a relative path. A lot of different ways of doing this, and a whole lot of the tools out there, a good chunk of them all assume that it's a single image within a layout, even though our layout definition, if anyone hadn't looked at it lately, it starts with index.json at the top level. So you can have multiple images with multiple tags within the same thing, and it's kind of a substitute for having a repository or a repo within a registry. So there's a lot of room for how you can use a layout with a tag, with a shot digest in there, multi-platform images, all that support can be within a layout. And I think a lot of the tooling out there has not gone that direction. They've just said, this is how we package a single image up. So combining those two things, when we've got multiple ways of referencing it, multiple ways of, or maybe one way of reporting if there is a tag or a digest in there, and a whole lot of tools that don't even think that's a possibility, I feel like there would be some value to having OCI look at this and say, let's standardize it. Let's actually come out with this. That way, if we're passing these between different tools out there, the same reference works in all the different tools. So that's what I'm looking at, just because I've seen way too many ways of defining this. And then when I switch from one tool to the other tool, is it OCI dashed, or is it OCI no dash? Is it OCI dash layout? Is there a : // Is there not a // Gets very confusing. So that's the big part of it. Jason, go ahead and jump on in now.
I'm completely in favor of this. I love this, and I want to yes and something about it. I would also love for there to be an OCI implementation of parsing this into a struct, like we have the image structs. I have maintained one of these for a while and find edge cases all the time. So having a not like the only one that's ever allowed to exist, but an OCI blessed one would be really nice. And then we can fuzz test the crap out of it, because these strings are very often user supplied strings, very often like things that could crash your program if they are 8 GB long or whatever. And so having a single, sort of everyone's eyes on this one parsing package would be super helpful, I think, for the community. I'd be very interested in helping contribute to that if folks think that's worth doing.
Yeah. The other area I know that when I originally put this up, there's a TOP out there. It's still in draft until I see a lot of people that jump in there and say, yeah, let's go ahead and do a quick working group on this. Akihiro had jumped in and said, we also need to do immutable tags, and how do we want to reference that within a reference. So I thought that would be another.
It's good that immutability or other reproducible flag in the
Reproducibility and immutability, both huge things to me as well.
I know that this topic also came up with the. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Akihiro, go ahead.
I'm still not sure whether the immutability and reproducibility should go into the OCI index annotation or difference. I think we can do some experiment.
I think I missed that because Akihiro's a little quiet. Can someone in the room repeat it?
Can you repeat? Maybe louder.
So I'm still not sure whether we can put reproducibility and immutability into the annotational strings, or we should put them in the OCI contrast reference string. I'm not sure we can do some experiments and see what is the best approach. Anyway, before discussing reproducibility and immutability, I think we can just standardize the OCI contrast reference string.
Yeah, I think I missed some of that too, but I think
you're saying standardizing the kind of string or otherwise to be used even as we start to experiment of like whether, like how and where best to say that it's immutable or reproducible. Like, should that go in an annotation or somewhere else, or just a particular string format, or what? Like there's experimentation to be done, but almost like it needs some thought and experimentation before just asserting where it should live and how it should live.
Yeah, I think the topic of how a string reference is formed also came up with the base image annotation discussion. I think that was like 2 years ago. It feels like 6 years ago. where we said like the base image is this reference, and folks were like, wait a second, that's not defined anywhere. And then we just sort of YOLO'd it in, which, thank you. So I think there's definitely like a place to backfill that and, you know, really specify that. And then that would also sort of build the ground on which we could build new, you know, formats or conventions or things for tags for immutability or whatever.
Yeah, to also key off of something Jason mentioned earlier, to have this standardized somewhere would be useful, because I think I was looking at Oris recently, just trying to implement this on their side and realizing they had all kinds of edge cases they were hitting. So you're not the only one that's seen those, Jason, and I'm sure I have as well.
Even if we don't go for a full like Go implementation that we all share, having a test suite of these are known to be good, these are known to be bad, these are known to be parsed this way, that I could manually then copy into a unit test of my own, that would even be super helpful. Just documenting all of the edge cases and making sure we all agree this is valid, this isn't, is, you know, 80% of the way there for 10% of the work.
Could we just write a grammar, like a BNF grammar? Would that be sufficient?
I think that's what's in distribution.
Yep.
And the answer is no, because there's some weird edge cases in there. For example, localhost gets parsed differently depending. If you just say the string localhost, it does not get parsed as a path on Docker Hub. It gets parsed as you've got a local registry you're pointing to. So there were some weird things in there where they're looking, is there a dot or a colon or a localhost? If so, it's a registry. If not, then it is something else.
I think that's a very good case to spell out in whatever future spec we write, because Go Container Registry does not treat localhost as any kind of special. Like if you had a Docker Hub image called localhost, we would let you push to it.
Docker Hub might not, but everybody else will.
Sure.
Yeah, I think there was some handling as in if the first component contains a dot, it's considered a host, otherwise not, but probably that ran into issues, so localhost may have been added. Maybe Phil knows them.
Yeah, I've dug in that code a whole bunch, and the three cases to switch it over from being a path on Docker Hub to being a registry is the dot, the colon for the port number, and localhost is one last exception.
Yeah, I think Go Container Registry does those first two and not the last one. So this is a strong signal that we should, you know, standardize on something, even in English that we can implement in Go, but ideally in Go that we can all share.
Found yet another edge case already in this meeting. So for next steps on this one, does it make sense to move forward with a working group? I know we're still a little shell shocked from the last one and still finishing up, wrapping up things from the artifact one, but does this feel useful to create a new one?
I'd probably say no to a whole working group. Yeah, I don't think we need to do it, right? Just
Well, to be fair, like that working group is now officially disbanded. It's done its job. Aren't we ready for another one? I mean, let's go.
The reason I was thinking working group is because I think working group is what OCI says is the path if you ever want to make a new repository or a new thing to maintain.
Or something that spans, you know.
Yeah. Then I would put this in image type.
Does live wholly in image spec or what?
Yeah, I think so. As this is especially because we have the precedent of there being an annotation that uses the reference, the undefined reference. We could just say, by the way, reference forever means this. Well, not forever because we'll change it, but like reference means this type of string parsed this way meant to be interpreted this way. And then the hard work of getting everybody to actually agree to that. But like, yeah, I don't think we need a new repo just for what is an image reference.
He wasn't asking if we needed a new repo, he was asking if it only affected the image spec. For example, it does affect distribution.
I think distribution just links to image
Just
spec.
links to this, yeah. There'll be some conformance changes.
I mean, distribution doesn't.
Just generally whether we should be linking the two or they should be standalone. But I think that's another can of worms.
It's confusing all the time. Where's this? Oh no, the other one.
Thoughts for the call, Jason?
Yeah, I guess I was confused about that. Are we saying the distribution spec does need to know what an image reference is? I can't think of any way it would.
Well, it's defined in the distribution spec, what the reference is, so. We
It's
have to
currently
redefine
defined.
that.
It's currently defined in the distribution repo, as far as I know, or in some
Yeah.
Docker documentation.
Yeah, if it's defined in distribution spec, it's only just as a definition, not really used anywhere.
Right. But if it, okay,
And that's an if. Yeah. I like Jason's idea. It's less work to not create a whole working group.
Yeah, I think we can start with.
Sorry, that was my time check. Moving on.
She was saying,
Okay. Okay. Good on this one? We want to hit the last can of worms? Okay. Last can of worms is talking about authentication authorization. We have pushed this one off for so long. It's been pushed way back from early days. And I know Docker did a good job defining on their side. The definition that comes out of Docker is to say you first ping the V2 API on the registry, just without any repo or anything else, just do a quick get on it. And depending on the auth header it comes back, you now know if you're doing a bearer auth or just a normal user password. I forget the other term for it. So based on however you're doing that, then the client is manually generating, what's it called? It's a scope is what they call it, where you define, I'm trying to do a push access or a pull access or push and pull access to be able to send data into a specific repository. And so you generate the scope with those specific fields in there, send those up to the auth server and get your password back and forth. So I've implemented this path. I think a bunch of other people have implemented this in the past, and we've probably all implemented it significantly differently. And I know that I've hit a lot of edge cases on a lot of registry servers where they have made different assumptions on their side as well. And so I feel like there would be some usefulness if we did some standardizing on it.
Yeah.
In my own case, places I've done my own little efficiencies, I skip the V2 ping. I just go straight to the resource I want to query and let the registry tell me whether or not I'm allowed to pull it or whatever. And if I need to authenticate, it just gives me a header back right then. It says you need to auth. I tried to avoid manually generating those scopes and failed. I ran into some registries that didn't automatically generate the scope correctly from what I was doing. And so I had to start manually generating it myself. So that's another area, whether or not we want to standardize that. I think there've been some desire to see more finer grain access on registries, not just to a direct repo, but going all the way to, individual tags, or maybe they want to look at specific media types, say this person's allowed to push up a signature, but they're not allowed to push up an image. There might be some use cases for something like that. And let's see, the credential helpers, I think that was really useful coming out of Docker. It'll be good to see that standardized. One thing I've thought about is when you start having long-lived credentials into things, do you need to periodically requery that credential helper and say, hey, I know that my containerd process has been up and running for 3 weeks. Maybe the password that I had cached from last time I checked the credential helper to a poll is no longer valid. I should refresh that. So those are kind of ideas I'm thinking along those lines. I'll leave that open with thoughts. Nisha's got her hand up first, so she beat everybody in the room.
Yes.
I know there's concerns about the credential helpers. about the current design. So I wonder if if the design should be reviewed before we make that something formal.
I think
Now's
Nisha
the
had her
chance to
hand
change
up.
it.
It's fine. No, I will +1 the credential helper thing. I think, is it the same issue as, so here's what I came across when trying to implement this on a Python client. The place where credentials are stored seems to be different for different tools. Like Docker stores its credential files. I think what happens is that Docker has a specific place where it stores its credential files, and everyone reuses the Docker auth library so that they don't have to deal with that. And it would be nice if there was like a canonical place where these things are stored.
Jason has his up.
I think I was nodding enthusiastically as you were talking. I'm totally for most of this. I think where you start to lose me is the cred helpers. If for no other reason than which spec does it go in? We don't really have a place for client tools behavior integrating with registries. Maybe that's runtime spec, but even then that like doesn't really work. I think things like distribution spec could say, here is a, clients may, definitely not should or must, but clients may use this mechanism to get auth, construct your scope in this way. Those sorts of things I think make a lot of sense in distribution spec as a, sort of paving the path that already exists in real life. And from there we can build on like other new improvements. I think that's very good, but I think the documenting, I think we need to make a distinction between documenting and specifying credential helpers. We can document how credential helpers work today very easily and not be, an OCI voice of God sort of thing, but just like, here's how cred helpers work. If you're building a client today, here's how they work. Yep. Here's how you can use them. But I don't think
yeah, we can do the same thing in the distribution spec around like how image spec is going to be doing for artifacts. We can do that there for some of these spaces that we have traditionally, held out with our hands. Please don't do auth or namespaces, as you guys were talking about earlier. But yeah, we recognize that namespaces and auth have to exist. Therefore, right. A lot of the container runtimes use forks, if you will, of the Docker resolve code to do some of this connections to the registries. Maybe that resolve code could move to a maybe not OCI, but possibly somewhere like containers/resolve.
So like on the registry side of things, like I agree. I like the idea of calling out credential helpers and that, we can in the spec say example, right?
Yeah.
But actually on the implementation side of a registry, this is one of the things with some of the larger registries like ECR, for example, we're not going to be OCI compliant if we introduce something that looks like the V2, sort of the I can't remember the RFC, the one that gives you the auth server, right? So that's how Docker Hub works. We have users of ECR that are like, hey, this is broken. I was like, it's not broken because it's not in the OCI, and we use fine-grained credentials for repo access at a given registry instance. So we don't even map to that architecturally. And so I love the idea of bringing this into a formal discussion and working through what we can put into the spec on the registry implementation side. Okay. So completely down with this. I think it's a great proposal, Brandon.
I'll plus one that I think the focus of this should be document what's already there, which is kind of like the V2 ping, the push-pull on the different endpoints, and then discuss why that sucks, basically. and where we can fix it to add something like fine grain access. But I think that like, I feel like the credential manager stuff is kind of in the weeds or a little bit too far out. I think we should focus on just fixing and standardizing what we know everyone already does or has to do. And then focus on embellishment.
I'm good cutting that out as long as we understand one of the challenges with credential helpers is how long is that password valid for? And is that something we want to define or not? For someone saying, here's how you get the credential for talking to pick your cloud of choice. If there's a common lifetime that password should live, that's useful to me.
Well, I mean, because I was
this needs discussion.
I was just asked this week by like Valentine from Red Hat, and it wasn't even like related to like particular runtime tools. It was just like an SSO discussion of like we're needing to talk to the different cloud providers and how do you resolve that? Like, can we please talk about that? This discussion, like unpacking that, or at least having an open forum for it.
Yeah, we definitely need a discussion on it. But you remember earlier when I said I was working on it, kept for 2 years? It was on this subject.
Yeah.
In Kubernetes to be able to specify, when these images need to be reinsured, re-authenticated, when they're allowed to be shared or not.
Yeah. One other edge case I ran into was multiple scopes. If you are doing a cross repository blob mount or something like that, having 2 scopes in the same auth request is something that I've seen registries really not like, even though it's part of the spec.
Talking about relation-based access.
You're talking about subject refers for artifacts and things like that, so you use one connection
So the scopes in here saying you've got access to this repository, and so anytime you try to go between 2 different repositories for any request, like a cross-repository blob mount, you want to know that the user has access to read from one repo and to write to the other one. And for me, it's nice if you just have one auth for the whole registry server for all the requests you're sending. And so when you get into cases like that, it gets a little complicated.
It does. And every registry is going to do it a different way. So.
Sadly, I found that out.
Because that solves this problem. Yeah. It's like literally what we do. But I'm like not going to tell every registry like they should adopt by TV. You should.
Cool.
That seems like a good place to leave it.
Yeah.
So
there's the plug.
So to leave this one and close it out, action items for this, are we going to look at moving this into distribution spec? Is that where people want to see it?
It makes more sense to be in the distribution spec, regardless. It needs to be discussed, and this is even if not to send it off into the weeds, but it almost seems like a good working group, just so it can be clear and not just have like, oh, here's this one GitHub issue that is unreadable because it's so long, like a living document, figuring out what kind of like what is success. How like teasing out the different aspects of it, of like when something is too much in the weeds, and how we can at least elevate the conversation, because I agree, it needs to go into distribution spec. Been asked for years. It's probably one of those GitHub issues that we just couldn't bring ourselves to close or otherwise. But to have this conversation on one or even a couple of GitHub issues on the distribution specs would become untenable. So I don't want to say a working group just because we just did that. And it's like a place to like go make yourself busy over there. Just it needs to be like kind of a living doc that gets teased out, and I think that needs to happen. I feel like.
Now you want a working group. Okay.
It's an important one, though, to finally settle this.
I would happily contribute to that working group, for the record.
All right.
I think the former working group you were talking about might tail into this one. So.
We'll see. I will go ahead and I'll get a TOB post working for the working group, get that put together sometime this week, and let people know that's out there.
A volunteer.
Serious. There's a few topics we had towards the last couple with the Jason. You had a lot of feeling on, but the topic about build full cache otherwise Being something around that. We didn't have quite notes for the discussion of that. This one we didn't quite have notes for the discussion on, but I feel like we captured a lot there in the doc. This has been very, very nice and useful. Obviously good to see some people in person, but thanks for joining online because y'all are just as much a part of it, so good. Thank you, Amy, for coordinating.
Yep, thank you.
Oh,
Sasha, I see you joining just as we're leaving.
I know, good morning.
He's just here for the goodbye wedding.
Well,
Bye,
all
everyone.
the promo over here. Thanks for hosting everything, Amy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
There are people over here. Wow.
Bye, y'all. I'll be there tonight if anyone wants to hang.
Questions. Company like